You're listening to the Hunt Stealth Podcast with Ryan Uffens, the podcast where we dive headfirst into the wild. Whether you're an aspiring hunter or an adventurer seeking the untamed, together we'll explore the strategies and stories that lead to success in the great outdoors.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Hunt Stealth Podcast. I'm excited to be able to sit down with Eric Wilson, who is an entrepreneur, a bow hunter, and podcaster. He's got a podcast called Do Not Go Quietly. I would highly suggest giving that a follow. And then also go check him out on Instagram. It's Eric Wilson Coaching. And we'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes. So go check it out, give him a follow. But Eric, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Ryan. Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, no, for sure. Excited. We've had a chance to talk for just a little bit here, but I want to talk as somebody who's experiencing similar things that I am. Tell me, how did you get into hunting? Because this is a newer experience for you, correct?
Yeah, well, I think like we were talking about offline. So I spent over 30 years on a football field as a coach. After I got out of college, 10 professionally as my career, and then another 20 plus years coaching high school ball. So a few years ago when I was going to get out of coaching, I was like, what am I going to do, with all this extra time? Obviously I like to train and work out and do all that stuff, but I like things that challenge me mentally as well. And, just kind of through a mutual friend, had gotten connected with Bert Soren, the owner over at Sorenex, and he and I had lunch one day, and he's a huge outdoorsman, has been hunting his whole life. His dad started hunting when he was a kid, and he started showing me his hunting apps and talking to me about bow hunting. And I was familiar with it because my brother has been a bow hunter his whole life. He was self-taught. My dad didn't hunt. I really wasn't raised around hunters, but my brother's been doing it forever. So I was familiar with it. And Bert was just like, hey, he goes, you need to go to a bow shop and shoot a bow. And he's like, just do that. And then like, call me back and tell me, what you think after you do that. And so I went down and like knowing nothing, but there's a pretty good bow shop in town, went down and, shot a bow for like, I ended up being there for like 3 hours, man. Like I was like addicted the minute I did it. And so
standard time spent at a bow shop.
Yeah. And then I called Bert back. I was like, all right, you hooked me. Like, what do I do now? So, and that, kind of started the cycle. That was about 3 years ago.
And so bow hunting is what you're doing.
Yeah. I haven't I've got a rifle. I literally haven't rifle hunted the entire time. I just am focusing on trying to be, a better bow hunter every season, so that's really what I've been doing. And I've, I dove in head first. I've lived in South Carolina, but I've hunted, Illinois, Missouri. I went out and did an elk hunt last year in Colorado and kind of tried to take that on and figure that out. So I'm just kind of doing the same thing I did in football. I'm like literally just throwing myself up against the wall and seeing what I don't bounce off of, I'm learning the hard way.
Well, it's good to know. I feel like I feel like I'm the only guy out there doing it because I started 4 years ago and started with archery, and that's all I'm going to do until I kill something. And anyway, so this is the year though. I think this is going to be the year.
The breakthrough year.
So
yeah,
it's fun, and it is. It's we definitely chose the most difficult type of hunting to get started in.
For sure. Yeah, there's no question. That's what, my my son he rifle hunts a lot. He hasn't taken up bow hunting, but he's he shot I think 5 does last year and then a couple of younger bucks, and it's, I'm definitely not diminishing rifle hunting, but out east, and out west, it's very different, but out east, you can sit over an ag field, at the right time of day, and you're not going to have to sit there too long without an opportunity. It may not be a booner, but you're going to get shot opportunities where, like with bow hunting, you just, unless you've got a decent amount of it figured out, you're not going to get opportunities unless you just get really lucky.
Yeah. It I mean, and we talked a little bit about this too, but for new hunters, there can be an overload of information that happens. And like, what would you say to somebody that's maybe experiencing that, that's just taking up hunting for the first time?
Yeah, I think honestly, as I went back and kind of reflected on last year, I think I'm dealing with some of that myself, having not just my own podcast, but, consuming a lot of content. There's so many different ways to do this. There's so many different approaches. Are you a rut hunter? Are you, an early season hunter? Are you somebody who hunts over bait? Are you, somebody that hunts over, bedding? Like, there's just so many different ways to do it. And everybody's kind of like the really good hunters. If you listen to them, they have one or two things that they do that they specialize in, that they're really, really good at. And it's really easy, I think, to listen to all those guys and kind of like, oh, I should try that, or I should try that, or I should try that. I think you got to figure out, what's your style. And then, kind of dig deep in it a little bit and not bounce around all the time on, what you're trying to do. So that's, as I reflect on like last season, I think that's what I'm going to try to do a lot more of this year, is just try to be more consistent in the way I approach things, and just, dive a little deeper on more specific things, as opposed to throwing a wide net out there.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I mean, I kind of had bounced around and done a couple different things. Like, one thing I know that I'm not good at is elk calling when it comes, specifically to hunting elk. And I've said this over the past couple episodes, so folks that are having to hear me say this, probably like the third episode in a row, I've discovered that my cow call sounds more like a mountain lion. So when I'm not giving up. But a lot of people that I've talked to, I mean, and I've talked to some young guys that have been out there, they're like, high school and that, and they're like, they just get out there and get deep into the woods. And like, the thing that I've discovered too with elk hunting is you don't have to be as quiet as I think you need to be. Like, you can make a little bit of noise. The bigger thing that you have to understand is the wind. And as long as you can stay downwind from the animals, you can get in pretty stinking close to them. And that's, anyway.
Well, I think as a West Coast guy, or as an East Coast guy, that's, you mentioned two things in there. One, for us who are hunting primarily whitetail, like, wind is the king. Like, that's, when we're not on big open areas, like in a lot of cases like y'all are. And so wind is everything for us when you're hunting from a tree. And so that's kind of like number one, is we're very in tune with the wind. But the second one, I know that when I was talking to Cliff Gray, this is one of the things that he sees a lot with people. And I found myself, when I went out and did that elk hunt last year, found myself doing the same thing. Was, we're super worried about noise out east because it matters. Whereas, just like you said, it's not as big of a deal when you're elk hunting. You can get away with more noise and I think the East Coast hunters who go out west, like, that's a mistake that we tend to make, is we think we have to be uber quiet all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, mule deer out here, you definitely want to be a lot more careful than with elk. But yeah, elk, there, you can leave yourself some room for error as it comes to noise. But yeah.
Yeah. I actually called an elk in last year on the first time I ever went out there. The problem is he came in quiet and I didn't know he was there until I busted him out.
What was that like?
It pissed me off. Like, it was very frustrating, So I was like calling it just right inside of a tree line, and it was an area that was around a burn. And I had practiced calling like the whole off season, and I had actually sent some of my stuff over to Cliff and been like, hey, can you listen to this? And then I would just, like, when I was in my truck, I would just play whatever stuff from YouTube that was just animal noises, and I'd try to mimic it. And I think I got pretty decent at it, especially my cow calls were pretty good. So I was calling inside this tree line, and there was deadfall everywhere. And so I was trying not, to avoid stuff, but I stepped on something that snapped pretty loud. And all of a sudden, about 25 yards away, you know, it wasn't a huge one. It was probably like a 270, 280 bull, but it was a nice 6, and just freaking busted out of this, little kind of outcropping of timber where he had snuck in there and was just sitting right there, like 25 yards away from me. And then he took off and he humped it about another 50 and, into another little outcropping. And he settled in there because he was barking at me a couple different times. And so I just thought, okay, I'll wait it out, see if I can call him back in, because he never saw me. Based upon where I was, I could tell he didn't see me. He just got spooked. And so I just kind of hung tight, and I just kind of called intermittently. And, in the course of about 30 minutes, he swung around downwind of me and, caught my wind. And all of a sudden I heard him bust out behind me about 30 yards and take off. And I knew as soon as I heard it that he had come around behind me and got my wind. So that was the only encounter I had in 7 days. But that was the morning of day 2. So I was feeling pretty good, on day 2. I was like, oh, it's the morning of day 2. I called an elk in. I'm like, I may do okay on this hunt. And I literally got my butt handed to me the next 5 days.
It kind of reminds me, I hate golf. I don't play golf, but when I do go out, it's like you have like one good shot. It's like, well, maybe like I'll come back and play again. Like I feel like I've had experiences like that when I'm hunting where, you have an encounter or something, and it's like, I fell in love with it. And I had this massive bull, like the very first time I went out, and 30 yards, I didn't have a shot on vitals. And anyway, got busted by the wind, and same thing, blew out. But I was like, this was the last day of the archery hunt. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, it hooked me though. Like seeing those animals like in the wild is pretty impressive. They are a majestic animal for sure.
Yeah, they're amazing. Like, and I love whitetail deer, but an elk is a different creature like in person. Like when you see an elk, it's just like, damn, that's pretty awesome.
There's, you go into like Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops or Shills, whatever, and you see an elk, but I don't feel like that really does them justice. Like when you see them in the wild,
no,
like when it's you and them out there, it's mesmerizing to me. That's why I fell in love with it. And I feel like that's why God was like, all right, like I'm going to hook this guy. We're going to give him a nice big bull, but he's not going to be able to take him. But just like got me hooked.
Chase it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of the other things, one of the questions you asked me before that I think another mistake that I've made is, and I think one of my buddies told me this in the off season. They were like, you just need to kill and get better at killing, right? Because last year I let 4 smaller bucks walk that all, and every one of them I pulled back on because I just wanted to make sure that I could pull back, and I was trying to make sure, okay, could I get this shot off, right? Am I doing it in the right way? Am I quiet enough? I wanted to know whether I could. So every one of them I pulled back on, and then I let down. But that was the whole season. And then I got to the end of the season and I was hunting in 10-degree weather in Ohio. And I finally got one that I wanted to get a shot on. And it was a clean shot coming off my release. And I use a lighted knock. It was going right there, and he jumped the string on me, and I put it right over his back. And in retrospect, I probably should have put the pin a little lower, and shot more towards the brisket than I did, but I wasn't shooting enough, right? If I had shot some of those smaller bucks, I probably would have learned that, or maybe learned that lesson on a smaller animal. So one of the things that I'm going to do this year is I'm not going to just turn something down because it's not a bigger animal, which I know, experienced hunters, and you can have an opinion on this. I know some people, probably think that that's the wrong thing to do. And in the beginning, that's why I was letting some things pass. But I think, after talking to Bert and to my buddy Joe, who, runs Osseo Gear, they were like, you got to get better at killing stuff before, because if you just wait until the time that you get an animal that you really want to shoot and you make a mistake on that one, then you're learning your hard lesson on the one you really want to take down. So like, I'm going to shoot more does this year. And if I get, a smaller buck that's I've got a good shot at, I'm probably going to take it this year. And that's a mistake that I made the last couple of years. I just let things walk.
Yeah. I haven't even, the past couple of years for me with aside from the first year had been able to even get on any elk. So, I mean, we had a really, really rough winter, which killed off a ton of them where I had been hunting. And then like you said, like the pressure, the last day of the archery hunt is like the first day of the kids' rifle season. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like, and you had talked a little bit about that, South Carolina. So like, I'm out there and I'm like, who in the hell is shooting? And I didn't even know that it was like the first day of the youth hunt. But I'm like, what is going on? And I'm going thinking like, do I need to call somebody? Like, let them know people are up here shooting freaking animals. But anyway, then once I got back up, came across them, like, have you guys heard those gunshots? Like, yeah, it's the first day of like the youth hunt. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, oh, great. But yeah, it's there's definitely a learning curve. And, Dustin Green, who you'd had some communication with, who's helping out with the podcast here, like we were out with him and he drew back on a little forky. He's like, I don't want to shoot it, but he's killed some animals. Right. And so I think, like you say, you get to that certain point. But for me, like my OTC elk tag is going to say any bull, any spike. If it's a spike, like I've just decided, like I don't care. Like I want meat in the fridge and I just want to have that experience, like getting the kill. And the same with the mule deers. Like I haven't really gone after mule deer myself. Like I didn't have a tag last year. Otherwise, when I'd have been with Dustin, I'd have probably smoked that one. Cause it walked right up on us. We ranged it like 37 yards broadside and Dustin was drawn back on it, but he's like, I want to wait for something a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. But for me, I'm like, if I had a tag, man, I'd have punched that thing. But
yeah, I think if you're, like I said, that's a lesson that I'm going to do it differently this year, and I have, I probably got spoiled in my, my first season. So, South Carolina is very difficult to hunt, because like you referenced we don't have bow seasons and rifle seasons. Like literally rifle starts the same day as bow and it runs the entire, season, 5 months long. So they're getting shot at from the jump, and they never get a breather. So you don't get them for 30 or 45 days, without them being shot at with a gun. So they're twitchy right out of the gate. But my first season, I went up to Illinois and I've got some family property up there and I shot a really nice, 140 8-point, on the third day of my hunt up there. And you only get one buck tag in Illinois. So I filled that tag, but he's a beautiful animal. And it was the first one I shot. So after that, I was kind of like, if it wasn't something close to that caliber, I was letting it walk, and so I think my point of reference on it wasn't like, I didn't think like, oh, I have to have this huge deer, but I felt almost like, okay, I know that I can, this is how I felt. I know I can do it when I need to, right? Because I did it. And so why would I shoot a younger animal that I can let grow? And until I missed, or put one over the back of that one at the end of last season, and I realized, okay, I made a really good shot the first time. He didn't jump the string though. He was his head down, he was feeding, and I put it right, right in the, like literally I pierced the back end of his heart, so it was a heart lung shot. But that one, when I look back at it, I actually pulled my pictures out at the end of the season, went back and looked, and I did put that one a little lower than the one I shot this past season. So that was a mistake I made. I just put that one too high. So I'm going to shoot more smaller stuff. I'm just going to get shots off this year.
Good. Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck. I'm sure you're going to have a super successful year. So
I'm going to give it my best, man. I'm going to hit Southern Illinois. I'm going to hit Missouri. And if I get invited back, I'm going to hit Ohio again. So,
yeah. And I do think also too, like it can be easy. Like you get like a nice, nice buck, your first kill. I mean, you're a successful businessman. You're a competitor. Obviously, you don't coach football if you're not competitive. I
This is
spent a lot of
true.
time coaching baseball, and so it's like business deals, everything in life is just like, okay, well, like that's what I got. I want to do that or better next. And so I think that's just like natural for anybody to want to try and do that. But yeah, if you want to get successful, I think sometimes, if opportunity presents itself, got to take it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That is kind of how, I think people that are that are super competitive, they hold themselves to the last standard, right? Okay, what did I do last? It needs to at least be that good. And so, you learn every time you do something, you learn from it. And that's been the learning lesson for me is, I've got to shoot more,
Yeah.
even
Well,
if it's not the same, even if it's not, what somebody who's been hunting for 20 years would shoot. It's something I need to shoot.
yeah. So you did the DIY elk hunt.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what was your experience doing that?
That was a little bit of everything. So it was a little bit of a different scenario. There was a business that I was involved with for a little while. And there was a guy that was part of that business who had like a house cabin up on the northern Colorado border, pretty close to Wyoming, and it was on a mountain. And he was like, "Hey, if you want to stay here part of the time, you can." So I stayed there part of the time. I camped out part of the time, and I found an area that
When you're deep in the wild, you need fuel that won't quit. ReadyWise Pro Meals delivers over 30 grams of protein and over 500 calories per serving, keeping you strong for the hunt, the chase, and whatever the backcountry throws your way. From the protein-packed breakfast skillet to the bold Thai coconut cashew curry, these lightweight, freeze-dried meals are ready in minutes. Just add water and get back to the adventure. Made in the USA and built for hunters, explorers, and anyone who refuses to slow down. Get yours at ReadyWiseOutdoor.com and use promo code STEALTH for 10% off your next order.
If you're chasing big game out west, you know your glass is only as good as your tripod. That's why I run the Muley Maniacs Canopy Pro Carbon XL. It's lightweight, rock solid, and built for the mountains. Whether you're chasing high country mule deer or late season elk, this thing never quits. Muley Maniacs are built to last and come with a lifetime warranty. Right now, you can save 15% off your order with code STEALTH at muleymaniacs.com. That's muleymaniacs.com. Built by hunters for hunters.
hey, if you want to stay here part of the time, you can. So I stayed there part of the time. I camped out part of the time, and I found an area that
Were you solo then?
I was solo, except for I had a camera guy with me because at the time we were doing this. We were doing a film for this business venture. So
Okay.
we had two camera guys up there. There was like four of us that were kind of based out of this house, but we were all hunting, separately. And then I spent part of the time at the house, part of the time, camping out. And I found an area that was a pretty good area from a road standpoint. So I think one of the things that in talking to Cliff and doing preparation for that hunt as a first time guy, I also had some conversations with Cody Rich. I don't know if you know Cody, but he's got the Elk 101 podcast. Cody was really helpful. Like the probably the general consensus that I got from people and guidance was like, hey, it's your first time out there. Don't feel like you have to dive like 6 miles in to the backcountry. You don't really know what you don't know what you don't know. You're not really sure exactly what you're looking for. You're not experienced evaluating the terrain that you're in and deciding, should I stay or should I go? So camp or hunt close to road systems so that you can be maneuverable, right? So that you can make adjustments to your strategy. If you go into a place and it's dead for a day and a half, like get out of there and go somewhere else. And so I think that was really good guidance. It actually served me pretty well because it gave me options. And So I found a place that mostly timber, but it had some good burns in the area. There were some decent drainages. There was a couple places that they had cut timber. So it had a lot of diversity. It backed up against some private land. And so as I looked at it, I was, okay, this is something that I feel like as a first time guy out there that I could manage, right? I could, even if I stink at it, it's not going to kick my ass. Like I can cover, 7-10 miles a day and know that I can cover it. Now I had trained for it, consistently for like 9 months. So I was in pretty good shape, but good shape on the East Coast is very different than good shape, in the mountains. And I knew that going in, like I didn't have any, false assumptions of what I was going to be able to do. I was like, okay, I need to make sure that I, as I do this, that I have something I can actually tackle,
Yeah.
So when I went in, that's really what, my game plan was. And I did practice calling a lot, and I felt like I was decent at calling for a first time guy. And so I was really just, that was my strategy. Now the mistake I made was the first week of the season, and I was not really prepared to go into a unit that literally no elk were making any noise. There was no bugles. There was nothing. It was dead silent for 7 days. Now I could hear them a little bit at night, but I didn't have an elk respond to a bugle the entire time. Like I said, I had one come in silent. And then, as I was talking to some people in the general area throughout the course of the hunt, like I would text people or whatever, everyone was saying the same thing. Like it's dead silent right now. And so again, you don't know what you don't know. But looking back at it, if you've got a lot of experience hunting elk, you're going to change your strategy probably after 2 to 3 days when you go, okay, they're not talking. I'm either going to completely go to a different area, which I wasn't prepared to go to a different unit. I was prepared to move around that unit, or you're going to hunt differently, and that's another mistake that I didn't have a fallback position for it if they're not answering calling. Like, what do I do now? Right. And so I just kind of kept making the same mistake. I did a couple times. So one day I pulled out, or actually like created a blind, and just sat a blind in an area that looked like a pretty good travel route. And I didn't get any action there, any luck there. And so I think the biggest thing for me is going back and doing it again. I would make sure I had a backup plan for elk that weren't talking, because I didn't have one.
Like in you speaking with these other people that have had successful hunts, like what advice did they give you as far as creating a backup plan if they're not responding?
Yeah. So a couple things. One was figure out travel routes, hunt travel routes. There were actually a couple guys that I ran into there who had been hunting that area for like 20 years. And 2 of them had tree stands, and they actually said, if we come out here during the rut, we do a lot of calling, but if we have to come out here early, like if they're not talking the first couple of days, we hang tree stands. And both of them had killed an elk almost every year they'd been out there, because they had figured out travel routes where bedding was. And they just, now you may say that's not why I'm coming out west, right? Especially if you're an East Coast guy, like the last thing you want to do is go out west for a week and sit in a tree stand. But they were successful doing that. So one thing is just hunting travel routes, potentially hunting wallows. It wasn't really hot, so I didn't know that sitting a wallow, all day long was the best strategy. So I didn't do that, even though I found a couple of them. Probably the best advice, and Cody told me this, a couple other guys told me this. They were like, if I get into that situation, they said they might rest during the day, and then they would go out at night, and they would literally drive, and like every mile or two, they would stop, they would bugle, see if they got a response, get back in the truck, drive some more. And they would drive and bugle at night when they knew the elk were more responsive. And when they got a good response that they wanted in an area, then they would just set up shop right there, sleep in their truck, and then they would go hunt that the next morning because they knew there was an elk in there. And that was something I had never even thought about doing. It was using the nighttime to locate and then going and hunting it in the morning in that area. So I thought that was really good. And that's something that Cody said he does all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hadn't thought about doing that. So, I mean, I'm picking something up from this. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's great advice. Because a lot of times, like you said, you just go out and you come out west and you just want to go grind. You feel like the objective is to go and beat yourself up, right?
Like if you didn't do 10 miles today, then you didn't do, what it takes to go kill an elk, right? You don't deserve to be out here.
But by the same token, also, it's like it's your tag. Like you hunt it however you want to. I mean, if the objective is to fill a freezer, then does it matter if you're hiking 10 miles a day or if you're sitting in a tree stand on a travel route, right? And I think the other thing, too, for me that I've learned is like the prep work. I haven't been great at going out and scouting beforehand to try and figure out where and what the animals are doing. And so that's one of the things that I'm planning on doing a lot more of this year is just getting out there, feet on the ground. I have the benefit. It's my backyard, right? Like I can take a weekend, go out and gather a bunch of information. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the fact that you're local, right? That's one of the biggest disadvantages that people like me have from coming out east, unless we're willing to take another week off in the summer, and go scout that area in the summer when, I don't know, but a lot of people I've talked to said just because they're in their summer doesn't mean they're going to be in there in the fall. I mean, that's what whitetail are like. I mean, whether in the summer doesn't mean they're going to show up there. So, but at the very least, like you said, if you go scout the summer, you can recognize travel routes, you can find bedding areas, you can have a decent idea of where they're more likely to be, as opposed to, trying to figure all that stuff out in a week.
Yeah. And what I've found out is like, I need to go higher, right? Like I found some good traffic routes. I found where they bed. I found the wallows, but where I've been going, like I'd go early in the archery season to try and get them there, but they don't come down there until the weather starts to turn a little bit and you get a little bit of snow up higher that starts to push them down. So they eventually get there. I'm just hunting at the wrong time of the year.
What elevation are you at?
Oh, we're probably like right around 8,000, between 8 and 10,000.
Gotcha.
I mean, but it's probably where I'm at is probably between like 7 and 8 where I had been. And I know there's other areas that are up, but there's a bunch of private land up there. And I hadn't really again, when I had gone up there, I've got a certain area that I go, very familiar with it. I'm starting to understand it better, but I don't want to go onto somebody's private land. So now that, I'm using like Onyx and different things like that, I can be up there and know exactly where I'm at and make sure that I don't go onto any private property, because that's the last thing I want to do is get myself in trouble with that.
Yeah, that was another piece of advice that, I got after the fact, but made some sense, was like, if you're hunting a piece of public that butts up to private, and that private is an area that's got really good food, there's a decent chance that they're feeding private during the day and bedding, over in public at night. And so, if I went back to that same area again, I would probably try to see if I could find travel routes between private and public, which I pretty sure, just looking back at it, I think I know a couple of them. And then potentially, set up along that travel route really early in the morning and get them moving from bedding, before they get over to private.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's good advice. I mean, you just, like you said, there's so much information that is thrown out there, but there's some basic things I think that you can do. And if you add to your repertoire, it definitely will make you a lot better. And then just like you had said, like you just have to get out there. You have to like start killing and putting the things together. I mean, me starting this podcast, like every single time I have a conversation, I'm hearing other people's experiences, like the successes that they've had, the failures that they've had. I've seen how I've been doing things, and I'm like, okay, I have been able to formulate in the past 7 months since I've started doing this a much better plan for me to be able to go out and have success. So I feel very confident that this is going to be a good year. I might not punch it, but if I can go out and get on more animals and give myself more opportunities, to me, like that's a success. So it's a matter of, if you spend time hunting, scouting, you're going to be able to put the things together that you've been learning. But like I said, like you had said, just figure out how you want to hunt and then focus on the things that will make you better in that style of hunting.
Yeah. I mean, these guys that, whether you read their articles, whether you watch their YouTube channels, listen to their podcasts, guys who kill all the time, right? Like, so if you're talking about West Coast guys like Brian Varney, Dan Bakar, those kinds of guys, Dan Staten, like a bunch of those dudes, they live out there, B, they've been doing this their whole life, right? So if you're fairly new to this, all these hard lessons that you're learning right now, those guys learned when they were 15 years old, 18 years old. Like they literally have learned and made every mistake you're making. The difference is they've learned from those mistakes over the course of, 30 years. And now they've narrowed it. Now, they've got it figured out to the point where, okay, if A happens, this is what I need to do to pivot and take advantage of that, right? If B happens, this is what I need to do, pivot. For people like us, we don't exactly know what the pivot move is when A happens and B happens. And that's just part of, it's very easy especially when you're older and you've been successful at doing stuff, you want to like beat yourself up over it. Like, oh, I should know this, or you really shouldn't. There's no reason you would know it, right? It's just, you have to take, and this is something, I tell them, like literally I have to tell myself this all the time. You have to take every learning experience as a victory and recognize that that's a step in the path towards eventually getting good at this, right? And it's no different than what I did as a football coach, what I did as a football player, what I did as a business, as an entrepreneur. I made a million mistakes in all of those things before I became really good at them. And this is no different. And so I just have to constantly remember that. And I also have to constantly evaluate, okay, what did I learn from that? Because I think it's really easy for us to just put in time, punch the clock. Oh, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to go do this. And like nothing happens. And you come back in, you're going to go back out next day. You're going to go back out 2 days later. But really using your brain and going, okay, what did I do? Like really break that thing down, the entire hunt, and go, is there anything in there that I didn't do right? Right? Or is there something that could have potentially, because it's one thing when you bust an animal, okay, something happened, but it's another thing when you do a sit and just nothing happens. It's easy to just go, oh, there's nothing there, or there's no animals around, or whatever. Well, maybe not, right? Did the wind switch on you in the middle of your sit and you didn't respond to it? You just kind of like blew it off, like, oh, I'm already here. Just a lot of different things like that. So just constantly breaking things down and trying to be analytical about it, just like you are in anything else that you've been successful in, in life. And then gradually taking those and getting a little bit better and getting a little bit better and recognizing that is the process. But that's, if you wanted to do something easy, you wouldn't have picked bow hunting.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. I feel I've gotten to the point where my range and my accuracy, I feel very strongly if I get it on an animal, like I'll be able to kill it. Now, I haven't even let an arrow fly yet on an animal, so I don't know. But I shoot my bow so much, I know it very well, and I know what my ranges are where I'm comfortable. It's all the other intangibles, like you said, like jumping the line. Like there's a million different other variables. Wind, I mean, you have a cross breeze, like it will change the trajectory of your arrow depending on the distance that you are to the animal.
Yeah.
So just kind of putting it together.
And for y'all too, like I mean, East Coast guys are paying a lot more attention to this, I think, now too. But thermals is a huge part of what you deal with every day. Flatlanders, we don't worry quite as much about that. But where I live, there's a lot of water, a lot of swampy areas, and so thermals play a really big part of that. But I mean, you just made a really good point, right? And that's okay. I'm super confident in my ability, shooting. Like I'm confident out to certain yardages. I feel very proficient. Why is that? It's because you've been doing it for 4 years every day, right? Yeah. Or a lot. And because you've recognized, you've made minute adjustments to, okay, I did this and my arrow's left all the time. Well, is that because of, where I'm positioning my hand, in the release? Is it because is it have to do with my follow through, or does it have more to do with the tune on my bow? Like you've picked all those little things apart and figured it out. The difference is you haven't gotten nearly as many reps in the woods as you've gotten, shooting your bow at a target. And so that's just, the more time you spend out there, the better you're going to get. And you're going to learn from your mistakes. I mean, I'm saying that to myself just as much as I'm saying it to anybody else that's in the same position as we are. It's like, you got to get in reps.
Yeah, no, 100%. Eric, maybe let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about your podcast, because I think it's a great podcast. You're putting out a great product. And again, I mentioned everyone should go give it a follow, subscribe to it, give it a listen. But
appreciate that, man.
It's Do Not Go Quietly. How did you come up with the name for that?
Well, so I played football all through college. And then after that, when I went into business, I started doing triathlons. I did triathlons for quite a while. Did like a half Ironman, got up to that distance. Then I did CrossFit for a while. And like around my late 40s, I started having issues in my back. And over the course of like 4 or 5 years, I went through two different back surgeries, one non-surgical procedure, tons of steroid injections. And I got to the point at one point about three and a half years ago where I literally I could hardly walk to the end of my driveway. I had gained like 70 pounds. Like I was a ton heavier. And through the grace of God and some really, good intervention from, an amazing physical therapist, a guy who does a non-surgical thing, kind of all these pieces fell together. And I was able to, through rehabilitation and everything, kind of work my way back through that. And this was actually one of the biggest reasons too, that I started doing hunting versus something else, is I wanted to be able to do something that was challenging and still physical, but I couldn't run anymore, do any of those kinds of things. So at the end of the day, like, as I got forward into like, what am I going to do next? And I decided that I wanted to tackle this, this challenge as bow hunting. One of the things I recognized is that as we get older, and I'm 57 now, but this was like 54, we tend to do things that are hard in our lives when we're younger, just kind of by the motion of life, right? Like when you're young, a lot of us are athletes, and then, we take on all these challenges in work. A lot of us become entrepreneurs. We take on challenges in there. And then it's super easy to get comfortable later in life because the natural challenges sometimes stop happening, right? You've kind of worked your way up the ladder, whether you're with a corporation or maybe your business has become successful and you're doing pretty well. And it's easy to kind of sit back and, revel in it a little bit. And I think one of the things that we run into from a lack of satisfaction in life is when we stop challenging ourselves. You hear all the time about this midlife crisis thing that a lot of men have. My personal opinion is that a midlife crisis is really a lack of challenge in your life. And then guys start seeking that feeling that they get from accomplishing something from a different place, whether it's, having an affair, cheating on their wives, substance abuse, whatever, right? They start looking for that kind of that feeling somewhere else.
Dopamine.
they used to get when they challenge themselves. And so do not go quietly for me just came from like, you know, the old poems like, I will not go softly into that good night, you know, which was a Frost poem. And so for me, it was like, don't do that. Like as you get older, don't go quietly. Just like continue to push yourself, continue to challenge yourself mentally, continue to challenge yourself physically, continue to find ways to put pressure on yourself. Because I think the pressure that we kind of inherently get put on us when we're younger is something you have to be intentional about as you get older. Otherwise you get really complacent. And I think you get unhappy, and that's where it came from.
Awesome. I appreciate that. What's kind of been like the main focus of your podcast?
So when I first started the podcast, it was a lot of it is, and a lot of it still is hunting. What I really just like to do is talk to people that I think are interesting. And that usually means they're doing something that I'm interested in. Right. It's so a lot of them are hunters. I get to learn from people. B, I just like talking to them and, you know, asking them questions that I don't know the answers to. But I've also had authors on, like I've had Jack Carr on before. I've had business owners on. Had Josh Smith from Montana Knife Company. Bert Soren's been on. Do you know Matt Bedreau with Apogee? You heard him? Tim Kennedy's business partner.
I'm familiar with him. I don't know a whole bunch about him, but yeah.
Okay. So he's going to be on one of the upcoming episodes. He's a guy who is a lifelong career educator. He was lived in California, Stanford educated guy, taught in the public school system, taught in the private school system. And about 10, 12 years ago, he basically said, our schools are failing our kids. And not just from the perspective of, you know, all this kind of woke stuff that a lot of people don't agree with now, but from the perspective of actually how we're educating and what we're doing in terms of, you know, he calls it assembly line education, which is park a kid in a chair, ask him to sit there for 8 hours a day. Everybody learns the exact same way. And it's very interesting because when I talk to him, the background for our entire educational system, like this is not how we educated kids up until about the early 1900s, right? Up until that point, kids were educated a lot at home. You know, even if they had schools in their communities, those kids had to work around the farm, had to do tons of work. And what happened was in the 1900s, when the Industrial Revolution was taking place, John Rockefeller and a lot of these people who were, you know, titans of industry needed workers. And so there's a quote, and they've assigned it to Rockefeller. No one's really completely proven that he's the one who said it, but it's pretty much the whole thought process behind the educational system was, we don't need a nation of thinkers. We need a nation of workers. Like that's what they wanted. They wanted people who would take direction and do what they were told to do. And so our entire educational system was based off of this Prussian model of education. It was developed to help their military learn and do exactly what they were told to do. And so when they studied it, they were like, okay, how are we going to educate our kids in a more formal way, but in a way that will create kids who will basically feed into our industrial complex? And so Matt like studied this whole thing. He and Tim Kennedy started this program called Apogee. It's got mentoring programs associated with it, but it's a school program. So they've got a homeschool system. They've also got an actual school program where you can, I think by next fall, they're going to be 150 of them across the country. And they're basically businesses that an entrepreneur can start. They can start a school, and Apogee kind of teaches them how to do it. And they can start them in different communities. I've gotten to know a guy who's starting one up in Raleigh. And it's a completely different way of educating your kids. There's no grade stuff. Like, so the sixth graders get educated in the same scenario, in the same room with a third grader. The sixth graders help the third graders learn. They don't push the core subjects super, super early. They spend a ton of focus around reading and a ton of focus around projects and like long-term, like how do you, there's entrepreneurialism is a huge part of it. So getting kids to figure out problem solving, right? So, okay, we're going to do this over the course of the next month. Here's where we want to end up. What do we have to do every day to get there, right? And so teaching kids how to think long term,
Critical
and then
thinking.
and then as they get further along in the school system, then it's like, okay, what's your goal? You want to go to college? Then we'll have to start doing some college prep so you can hit the test and all that stuff, right? But like you said, it's critical thinking and life management.
Yeah. I'm familiar with the program. I've done a little bit of research into it. I've got my kids are all out of the school systems now. Fortunately, they've all come out normal for the most part. But I've got one daughter that's, she just had, I've got two grandkids, and I'm going like, I don't want, you look at what's happening. Fortunately, it's not as bad as, the woke stuff that you were talking about here in Utah. But I've got a sister-in-law who's been homeschooling her kids, and you just look at the program, and I mean, they're teaching them like physically how to work too, which I think
Yes.
is a big component, because I mean, and I get it, as a parent in today's society, like, I mean, both parents are having to work. You've got, you give them an iPad and just like let the kids kind of go and do their thing just to consume time so mom and dad have a minute to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think what they're doing is great. And yeah.
Yeah, a huge part of theirs is like the physical component of it is a huge part of it too. Just like you said, it's like physical education, like real, we're going to do stuff that's physical every day. We're going to make sure that you understand the importance of keeping your body in good shape, the importance of eating well. Like all that stuff is a core component of Apogee, as opposed to, throwing them in the public school where they get almost no PE anymore. They're not, my wife and I were just talking about this today was, remember when we were growing up and we used to have the President's Physical Fitness Award, and they would like weigh you, and they would, you had to run and do push-ups and do sit-ups and all this stuff. They don't do any of that stuff anymore with kids. So it's just a completely different way of looking at educating your kids. And I'm right there with you. Like mine are grown, my youngest is still in college. But I got 3 grandkids, and it scares the crap out of me, the idea of them being in public school for the next 12 years. Cause it's very different than it was when you and I were growing up. Like we were taught, if you don't go to college, you're going to be a failure. Right. That's at least that's what I was taught. Right. It's like, hey, if you came out of high school and didn't go to college, like, what are you going to do? Life has completely changed. Like our society is so different now. You can make probably more money than, coming out of high school without a college degree than you ever could have before. And in many cases, you can make a lot more money than the guy who goes to college and gets a degree. Because if you figure out how to do a trade, you can turn that, like, I think the old thought process is, oh, I don't want to be an electrician. I don't want to be a plumber. I don't want to be this. Well, that doesn't mean you have to go work for somebody the rest of your life. If you learn how to do that really well, then you can start a plumbing business. You can start an electrical business. You can start an HVAC business. And, you could have 20 trucks running around and be a multimillionaire, and you never had to go to college. Like never has that been more true than today. And so I think but our schools are still pushing every kid to college. And so I think if you really want your kids to be able to look at things differently, you have to think about educating them differently. And so that's just an example. Like that's, Matt's going to be on, but those are the kind of people outside of hunting that I'm trying to talk to and get on the podcast, or people that can bring value to the people that listen to it. But also people who are looking at things differently, in terms of the way they're approaching things right now, and in the way that we raise our kids, the way that we, serve as husbands and fathers, all that kind of stuff, so that we can ultimately be, better at what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm kind of like a unicorn for someone my age, because like I didn't go to college. I had enrolled. My wife was pregnant. and I'm like, I just got to go work. I got to go work and make money. But I was like a voracious reader. I mean, I still to this day, I'm constantly, whether I'm reading or listening to Audible or Spotify, whatever, I'm constantly digging into books. I think that's the one thing, it's interesting that's such a core component that Apogee is doing is like the reading, because I read like a ton of self-help books. I read a ton of entrepreneurial books, and I got into sales, and sales is a business. It's a job that you have to learn. I mean, communication skills, you have to learn negotiation skills, you have to uncover people's problems. And I was just constantly trying to learn myself. I read so many business books that, I was able to go out and have success. And, so I'm kind of at a pivot point in my life with the things that I'm doing. We talked a little bit before, but like this podcast, I mean, who'd have thought a podcast about hunting would be a way for people to generate some income? I mean, it's I'm not able to retire. I'm not even to like do anything right now with this, but it's something that I love. Like I love having these conversations, and I'm kind of the same thing. We've had, I had Dr. Paul Baratero, who is the founder of Echo Water, right? Which is I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but been able just to like learn about his business. And like, I'm a believer in that hydrogen water. I had numb hands for 10 years, and the doctors were like, there's nothing that you can do about it. Like, you're just going to have to deal with it. And so I saw Dana White talking about the hydrogen water, and I'm like, well, I'll try it. There's a lot of other things they could do. I wasn't even thinking get rid of my numb hands, nutrient absorption, just get rid of inflammation. But I started drinking the hydrogen water, and like the pain, the numbness in my hands is gone now. It doesn't wake me up at night anymore. So it's just being able to like learn. And I'm going like, hey, that would be something that if someone is experiencing like inflammation in their body, I mean, there's so much of the food that we put in that causes that I'm like, hey, I wanted to learn about it. So we just had them on and talked, and it was a ton of fun. But there's so many different things that are out there and ways that people can grow and earn an income. And the biggest thing that had scared me about sending my kids off to school is I didn't want to send, a son to school and get a daughter back, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's
it's
just
crazy
me.
you even have to say that, but it's true.
I know. And people are like, you shouldn't talk about that on your podcast. I'm like, I have also reached the age where I don't care. I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And if you don't like it, turn the podcast off, go find something else. But I feel pretty safe speaking to this hunting audience that
I don't think you have to worry about most of the people listening to this, whether they're going to take offense to that or not.
Yeah. And if they do, like, that's fine. Take offense to it. But anyway,
I think it's good that you're touching on some of that stuff too, because I know that there's, while most of the people that are listening to my podcast are much better hunters than I am, like I didn't really focus mine around new hunters. I just focused mine around bringing guys on that are really good at it because I wanted to learn from them. But I also know that there's a lot of guys out there who would like to some way, shape, or form work for themselves someday. And that is something that I'm really good at. And I think it's something that a lot of people are afraid of. So I try to, bring that into the conversation, every fourth or fifth guest, just so I continue to provide exposure to it, because I want, like, my willingness to take chances and on building businesses has been has created an opportunity for me to have a life to do things that I never thought I could have ever done growing up the way I grew up. And I want other people to take those chances, because it's not as risky as it feels if you have a plan.
So what would you say to those people as far as putting a plan together? Because, I mean, you get a lot of guys that are a little bit later stage in life that, they haven't been smart with their money, and they don't have like a nest egg, and they've got a job and they're just getting by. And then you've got other guys that, maybe they do have a little bit of money. But what would you say to somebody that's out there that's like wanting to take that jump? And yeah.
Yeah. So I will tell you, first of all, it's going to be scary. Yeah, like it was scary when I did it. Like I've done it multiple times with different things, and it's every time it's been scary. Um, if you can, if there's a way that you can figure out how to ease into it, like where, okay, this is my full-time job, but I can do this a little bit at a time, so that I can just give myself some confidence that if I did this more, like I could just continue to elevate it, right? Like if there's a way you can do that, that will give you a lot of confidence, as opposed to just being like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and go start and try to figure this out. So whether that means you're, running some kind of a service business that you try on the weekends, or you do it after hours, or whatever it is, the great thing is in today's society, whether you're trying to sell something, you can do that digitally. If you've got a service, you can do that on the weekends. You can do it in the evenings. It's never been easier to advertise, and to actually reach people than it is now. I mean, you used to have to buy commercials and run radio spots and all that kind of stuff, and now you can, digital ads are a ton, less expensive. So I think figure out how to promote what you're doing, in advance. And if you don't know how to do that, seek some counsel, right, from people that have already done it. That's another, just like, I do this with hunting, but from a business standpoint, find somebody that that's done what you want to do, and figure out, if they're willing to talk to you. And if they're not, find another one, and just literally ask them a million questions, get as much information as you can, and then try to do it in little bites to give yourself a little bit of confidence, so that okay, if I can do this with just this amount of time, and I've made this much happen, then I know if I quit this and I really pour everything into it, I can just escalate it and scale it. That's where I would say to start, but don't think it's impossible, because it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I coached college football for 10 years, and then I left that, and I said, okay, I don't have any skills, right? Well, I was a really good recruiter, so I knew I could sell. So then I went into, pharmaceutical and medical sales. I did that for 7 or 8 years. We had never run a business in our life, but my wife had a practice. She was in the same business I was in. She had a medical practice that the doctor was sick of running, but it was a cash pay practice. The doctor didn't want to own it anymore. We didn't know anything about running a practice, but we knew how to sell and we knew how to advertise. And since that was a cash pay practice and there was no insurance around it, we were like, well, we're pretty sure that we can drive patients through the door, and we'll figure the rest out. But we knew we could figure out a way to drive revenue, because we knew how to sell and we knew how to advertise. So we took a huge leap, and took out a big loan and did that, and it worked. And then we just kind of continue to do stuff like that. So find something you're good at and figure out how to leverage that into something that is your business instead of somebody else's.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And like we were chatting before, I have people all the time that I come across, and they're like, how did you get Donnie Vincent as your first episode guest? Right. And
Like,
to your point of like reaching out to some of the successful business people, just ask. Like, pulled up Instagram, typed him a message, told him the truth, how I came across his films. I was a huge fan, and I'd be honored to have him as a first guest. I hit send, and, I sat down. I remember sitting in my basement, typing this out. My wife had come down into my home office, and she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm writing this. And she doesn't know who he is. She could care less. But I was like, he's somebody that I looked up to, that when I started hunting, I started following his films and that. And she's like, that sounds good. She's like, what do you have to lose? And I'm like, nothing. So I hit send, and I'm like, I'm never going to hear from him. 28 minutes later, I get a response back. And 2 weeks later, we're recording our first episode together. So it's wild that just, you have to be willing to, like you had said, just like take chances. If you can, plan it out, kind of be strategic in what you're doing, but don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. I think people that are successful too, Ryan, like they want to help people, right? When you get to a certain point, I've never had anybody say, can you get on a call with me? I'd like to ask you about ABC. And I've said no, right? Because I recognize that a lot of the reason I've gotten to where I am on the business side of my life is because of people who were willing to give me the time when I was young. And so I'm willing just to have that conversation with anybody. And most people are, unless they're just so full of themselves that you wouldn't want to, if that's somebody like that, you don't want to talk to them anyway. But most people that are successful want other people to be successful, and they're willing to have a conversation with you. So I think we tend to put more barriers on ourselves than anybody else would put on us. So just to your point, just ask somebody, hey, can I sit down and have a conversation with you? I've got an idea, or you're really good at this and I'm pretty good at it, and I'd like to figure out how to turn it into a business like you have. Could I take you to coffee? Could I take you to lunch? And most people are going to say yes.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I think sometimes people just get afraid to, like we talked about, to ask. That's the one thing that I've learned from being in sales. I've gotten totally fine with rejection.
Yeah. As a fellow sales guy, I'm the same way. My wife always tells me that my superpower is my ability to get people to say yes. And I'm like, you know what the secret to that is? You're okay with hearing no. You'll get a no every once in a while, but as long as you're not afraid of that, you'll get a lot more yeses than you think you will.
Yeah. No, I agree. You just have to learn how to thicken up the skin.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, that's right.
Anyway, Eric, hey man, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, brother.
It's been great getting to know you. You guys go give him a follow again, Eric Wilson Coaching on Instagram. Do Not Go Quietly is the name of the podcast. I'll make sure I put links to everything in the show notes. So go give them a follow. If you guys have learned anything or you feel there's something that someone else could benefit from, please share this podcast. Send it out to them. Send them a link. Send it to them on YouTube. I mean, it's everywhere you could listen to a podcast. So if you guys would share it, I would be forever grateful. And again, stay safe and God bless.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.